Our gospel lesson comes from Luke chapter 15. Listen with new ears for what God has to say to you today. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. Jesus said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me.' So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his field to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? And here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. And get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost, and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field. When he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked, 'What is going on?' He replied, 'Your brother has come home, and your father has killed the fatted calf, and because he has got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and pleaded with him, but he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Hi, my name is James. God has richly blessed me, but I am an old man now, and my family has told me to tell my stories. So I'll share a story with you. God blessed me with 2 sons, many daughters, and a good wife. My herds were large and my fields productive. It has been a good life. I've tried to follow Torah and be a good Jew. I have listened to the elders. I have made my sacrifices. This is my story. I have 2 sons, and as they grew, I taught them my trade of keeping the lands and the herds. They were both fast learners, and they could be good workers. My oldest son, now he could always be counted on to do his tasks quickly and dutifully. He didn't work with a smile on his face, but you don't need to smile to do your work. He was and is a hard worker. Now my younger son, he liked to be creative. It isn't a helpful trait when you're doing the tasks required to keep the land. But he learned work is about working, not about playing. Now this story causes me pain. One year, my youngest son came to me and offered great offense. I was years away from being an old man. But he came into the house one night, and I remember that funny expression on his face. And he said, "I want my inheritance." And we looked at him confused. He said, "This isn't the life for me. I want my inheritance now, so I can go out and find my way in the world." Well, his older brother slammed his fist on the table and yelled at him in anger. And my poor wife, she fainted. And I just sat there dumbstruck. Was he wishing me dead? Eventually, I sent my older son with his sisters and my wife to take care of her. And I listened as my younger son told me how he always had felt like he didn't belong, how he felt constrained, that the jobs forced upon him were slowly killing him. And he cried. I think that's what got to me. He said, "I'm sorry, Father, but I can't take this life. I need money to go and seek my own path." And then I cried too. He is my son. What could I do? I couldn't disown him and pretend like he had never been born, like my neighbors suggested. I couldn't send him off to starve with no hope of survival. And although he is a good worker now, at the time, I wasn't sure he could hold a job with his creative exploits. So I did what he asked. The entire village sneered at me and told me I should have treated him as if he were dead. But off he went to seek his fortune and be happy. Oh, how I wished that his happiness hadn't taken mine away. After he left, life settled into a new routine. My older son doted on my wife, and he continued to do his job dutifully without complaint. Though the scowl that he wore on his face, that was new. We did the work, but there was less joy in our lives. We had no idea where my youngest had gone. Each day stretched into an eternity. And I found myself, as I worked, scanning the horizon, hoping he would return. And then one day, in disbelief, I saw a figure walking over the rise of the hill. And he moved like my son, but it couldn't be. So I watched. And then without meaning to, I started walking toward that person And the closer I got, the more sure I became that was my son, and I ran. I ran to meet him and threw my arms around him and said, "Welcome home." I gave him a robe and a ring. We probably made a pretty strange sight. He didn't look too good, and he really didn't smell too good. And I knew that his hopes of finding his fortune hadn't panned out. He told me later that he had intended to ask me for a job as a hired hand. But I didn't hear him that day. I was just too happy to see him. He came back to me. I ordered the servants to make a feast, and we had a party. That's what God would do, welcoming his child back into the fold, rejoicing that what had been lost was found. Love. But that's not what my neighbors said. They said, "This person that you call son has been no son to you. He wished you dead. He took your money. He went out and wasted it. You're welcoming him back? Are you crazy?" I try not to let it bother me, because that is love. The price of love is that even after a mistake, I still love my son. Now, I'm not stupid. He's had his inheritance. I won't take from my older son and give it to the younger. It's not even mine to give. It belongs to my oldest. There are consequences for my younger son, but that doesn't change my love. What would you have done in my place? Here we are, faced with this father's unconditional, untraditional, and countercultural love for his child. Now, this story is a parable told by Jesus when the Pharisees were grumbling because Jesus was welcoming sinners. It's unlikely that this is a true historical story. But that doesn't change the truth that the story teaches us about God and God's abundant love. In the stories right before this, a lost sheep, just one of 100, has wandered off and is searched for and found. And then a woman cleans her home top to bottom to find one lost coin. And now we hear of a son who was lost and found. This is a story for all sinners. It's for all those who have made bad choices, who have done things they shouldn't have, who have hurt those that they love, who have turned away from God. For all of them, for all of us, this is a story of God's love always, 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 always welcoming you home. For God so loved the world. God becomes the father in this story, who runs to welcome his child home. This son who had wished his father dead, who was dirty and smelly and ritually unclean. He'd been working with the pigs. There was nothing to commend this man to anyone, even to his own father. And yet he was welcomed with lavish gifts and a party. So I wonder what it would look like for us, being the recipients of that love, to share it with the world. Who is it that you cannot imagine welcoming home? Who is it that has crossed your line in the sand that would make you want to stay away? Is it a pedophile who preys on innocent children? An immigrant who is in the United States without legal paperwork? A suicide bomber who believes it is a holy act to kill others? Is your line in the sand based on skin color, or religion, or drug abuse, or addiction, or gender identity? Wherever your line is, what would it look like to go beyond that line with unconditional love and welcome someone home? Someone we have deemed unlovable and unwelcome. This parable is about God's wildly abundant love to the unlovable. And it should rock our world, because this is really hard. Who is it that we should be welcoming and throwing parties for? Who is it? Let's sit for a minute and just think about that. Pray about that. Who is it that we need to be welcoming?